Hey, everybody. It is your boy, Reverend Phoenix Coffin-Williams, coming to you from the Temple of Holistic Knowledge here in Buffalo, New York. Today's date is Friday, September 30th, 2022, and I'm coming to y'all because I wanted to make sure that I celebrated Intimate Partner Violence Awareness Month before the month was over. So that is what we are going to be doing today. For the next couple of minutes, we are going to be reviewing, talking about, discussing, and interacting with the idea of intimate partner violence. And we will be discussing a little bit about its impact, and specifically for all you men out there, you male-presenting people out there, we're going to be talking about ways to make sure that we don't participate in any toxic behavior. Today, I am going to be using two stories to help illustrate the issue and kind of jump us into the discussion. So let me just go ahead and switch cameras real quick so you can take a look at what I got for y'all. Boom. So right here, we have the statues of Saint Lucy, and we have the statue of Saint Dymphna. Then we also have a picture of Saint Dymphna because her iconography, her image is depicted in two different ways. So the reason why I am focusing on these two for this particular celebration is because they have remarkable stories that represent intimate partner violence, or gender-based violence, as a very serious theme in their life. So I'll start off with the story of Saint Dymphna. Her feast day is May 15th. According to legend, Dymphna was born in Ireland in the 7th century. She was born into a royal privileged family. Her father was said to be King Damon, and her mother was only known as the Queen. And in Catholic lore, Damon is described as a pagan, and his wife, the Queen, was supposed to be a devout Christian. It is said that the Queen was known for her remarkable beauty as well as her faith, and she baptized and raised Dymphna to be a Christian in secret. As a result, Dymphna would consecrate her virginity to God and keep the counsel of her Catholic priest and confessor, Father Gerebron. King Damon and his queen enjoyed a very brief marriage. She died 14 years after the birth of their only daughter, Dymphna, and following the death of his beloved wife, King Damon went mad with grief. Damon was inconsolable. His court became increasingly concerned with his condition as he began to neglect his royal responsibilities and reject the privileges of his nobility. And as Damon became increasingly and obviously more melancholic, his advisors took to brainstorming what could be done to help restore their king and his kingdom. Although they had many suggestions, none of them seemed to interest Damon until one of his advisors suggested that he remarry. Interested in this idea, Damon found that he experienced hope in his heart for the first time since his beloved wife's departure for the spirit world. He agreed that he would indeed take another wife, but only on the condition that his new bride be just as beautiful as and look just like his old wife. Delighted with the prospect of having a joyous kingdom and an improved life, scouts set out in a desperate search for a woman whose qualities could restore Damon. Much time would pass, however, and the king's scouts were unable to find a woman who was as beautiful as and looked like Damon's original queen. And each time a scout returned with no news of success, he would lose the hope that had been instilled with the prospect of a new wife. And the king sank deeper into his depression. Damon's advisors again reconvened in an attempt to find another solution. One of them suggested to Damon that he marry his daughter. She was 15 years old by this point. So just for a point of reference, Dymphna is the smaller statue with the green dress beside the image, the little postcard. She was 15 years old by this point. She was astonishingly beautiful and looked remarkably like her mother. Initially, though, Damon was taken aback and disgusted with the idea of marrying his daughter. However, his grief and his sadness and depression intensified, and his mind began to warp. He began to entertain the idea of being happy again and seriously considered a life with Dymphna as his new wife. He started to consider this as a serious solution to help him overcome his feelings of hopelessness and desperate despair. It wasn't too long before King Damon turned his mind romantically toward his 15-year-old daughter. Damon decided to gently ease Dymphna into the idea. He attempted to remind her of the increased status and access to funding she would have as his queen. He also attempted to flatter her by comparing her beauty to that of her mother. He continued his attempts to persuade her with warped attempts at rationalization, and stating that only his princess is worthy to be queen, and to be queen she must marry the king. None of these attempts moved Dymphna any closer to accepting the proposal. The truth of the matter is that Dymphna was utterly disgusted at the idea of an incestuous relationship. Further, she had already consecrated her virginity to the God of the Christians. The proposal was against her moral code as well as the code set forward in the faith she was so devoted to. In totality, the idea was unacceptable to her. This being the case, Dymphna did know that she would not be able to escape the demands of her father, the king. She knew that he would keep asking, pleading, demanding, and escalating in his attempts until he got what he was after. In order to escape her father's fits and violence at having been renunciated, Dymphna's spiritual advisor and confessor, Father Gerebron, suggested that she flee. Seeing that she had no other realistic options for her safety and chastity, she agreed, and Dymphna, Gerebron, and several of her loyal servants took what fortune Dymphna did have and stole away, leaving behind her father and her kingdom. The group would leave the island of Ireland, travel across the waters, eventually settling in Belgium. Specifically, they settled in a place called Giel, which is in the province of Antwerp. It was at this location that Dymphna, Jerebrand, and her servants would utilize her remaining fortune to impact those who were suffering and less fortunate. She took immediately to help the sick and the poor of the region. And it would be this act of grace that would lead to the conditions of Dymphna's martyrdom. Utterly seething with rage, jealousy, and feelings of betrayal, Damon again sent out scouts and messengers to locate Dymphna. It took a bit of time. However, scouts who had entered Belgium stopped at an inn for rest. The innkeeper recognized the currency that the scouts had used to settle their tab and innocently remarked that this money was the same as Dymphna, a foreign do-gooder who had arrived and supported the community with it. The messengers would confirm her presence with their own eyes, then rush back to Damon's kingdom, notifying him of their success in locating her. King Damon set out to Gil at once in hopes of bringing Dymphna back with him. And upon his arrival, he returned to his persuasion, promising great wealth and status in exchange for marriage. Dymphna's mind would not be moved. She upheld her vow of virginity in every single breath. And in anger and at an attempt to coerce Dymphna, Damon ordered that Father Jerebrand be murdered, and his scouts did as he commanded. Jerebrand was beheaded as Dymphna watched. Damon made his request for marriage again, and still Dymphna refused to end her incestuous relationship with her father. Finally, fed up, Damon ordered that Dymphna be killed. His scouts moved forward, attempting to deliver on their king's orders. However, nothing they could do would harm her. Damon took up his own sword and murdered her. And so is the story of Saint Dymphna. So some themes here. Obviously, there's the theme of mental illness as a contributing factor to intimate partner violence, or to, violence against a family member. So the reason why I include this story in a discussion about intimate partner violence is because while Dymphna and Damon were not lovers, their relationship was close. They were in the same household, and abuse does happen within this context. And far too often, very many stories do include an aspect of incest to them as a component to the sexual assault that happens in them. So again, some themes associated with this story include mental health, depression, grief, as leading to irrational decision-making, warped thinking, problematic thinking. There's also the theme of privilege here. Damon felt a type of ownership over his daughter's body, over her life. And we can confirm this because if she wasn't going to agree with him or agree to be his wife, he was going to have her killed. Like, he really killed her. And a lot of times, stories involving intimate partner violence do end with murder. Sometimes it's the murder of the victim, and sometimes the victim gets enraged and empowered, gets desperate for their own life and their own safety, and they, put an end to the suffering and the abuse, and they end the cycle in a violent way. So think about Jennifer Lopez in Enough. Like, she had to kill that dude. So just as an example, the next story, the story of Saint Lucy. Saint Lucy is the taller statue, the one with the eyes on the platter, and holding the palm branches in her hand. Saint Lucy, whose feast day is December 13th. According to the lore, Lucy, aka Lucia, was born on the island of Sicily. So geographically speaking, Sicily is the island that the boot of Italy is kicking. So according to the lore, Lucia was born on the island of Sicily around the year of 283. She was born to rich parents who had titles of nobility attached to their names, and it is said that her father was Roman and her mother Greek, a Greek woman named Eutychia. Spiritually speaking, it is acknowledged that both of her parents celebrated their original Roman and Greek polytheistic faiths. Historically speaking, Christianity was highly illegal and savagely persecuted by the Emperor Diocletian at this time. The conflict in Lucy or Lucia's story begins quite early, as Lucy had been inspired by the story of Saint Agatha. Saint Agatha consecrated her virginity to Christ, but was also promised to a Roman nobleman and was due to be married. Saint Agatha consecrated her virginity to Christ, and inspired by that, Lucy did the same. And this is the conflict. So Lucy was promised to a noble person, but was determined to maintain her virginity. Additionally, Lucy had also hoped to use her wealth and influence to serve the poor of her community. However, along with her body, her wealth would soon belong to her husband. And as a way of coping with the realities of her life, Lucy made several pilgrimages to the relics of Saint Agatha, who was a sort of matron for Lucy, and she frequently prayed to be liberated from her marriage arrangement. One night, as Lucy lay asleep in her bed, she was visited by Saint Agatha in a dream. And in the dream, Lucy was told that she must bring her mother, Eutychia, to the relics of Saint Agatha, and her illness would be cured. Now, at this time, Lucy's mother, Eutychia, suffered from hemorrhaging for several years. Lucy did do as she was told by the apparition in her dream, and she brought her mom to the relics. At the site, Eutychia was indeed cured of her hemorrhages, and she was convinced by the power of her daughter's faith. Eutychia agreed to help Lucy actualize her dreams of serving and remaining chaste. Lucy moved forward with her ministry immediately. She began working with the poor of her community, feeding the hungry, trying to get people housed, a real social worker, so to speak. She was observed using her money to help the disenfranchised in many powerful and necessary ways. She was overheard openly discussing her faith and her life as a virgin. This both embarrassed and angered the nobleman that she was engaged to. From his perspective, they had been engaged for 3 years, and his would-be wife was publicly undermining their arrangement. Initially, the nobleman addressed his concerns with Lucy's mother. He considered that she was being silly or had taken ill. However, Eutychia confirmed that Lucy had made her choice. The nobleman was not too pleased and decided to escalate it further and address his dissatisfaction with her father. And while he did have sympathy for the nobleman, even the father stated he would not force his daughter to marry someone she herself had not chosen to wed. He reinforced that Lucy would only be married in accordance to her own free will. Finally, the nobleman returned to Lucy in hopes that he could persuade her to change her mind. He remarked of her status and how beautifully she dressed and how he cherished her. Upon hearing this, though, Lucy began to dress modestly, like the poor she had hoped to continue serving. And this frustrated the nobleman. However, he did not relent. He remarked at how beautiful her eyes were and how he could stare at them for eternity. And upon hearing this, Lucy gouged out her own eyes and sent them to the nobleman so that he could look upon them as he wished, while leaving her to continue her ministry as a blind woman. This final act, which left Lucy's body disfigured, enraged the nobleman to an extreme degree. Resolved, he decided to take this matter to the governor of Sicily, a person named Precipitating. He reported that his betrothed of 3 years was confessing herself a Christian, renouncing sex for the rest of her life, and giving her wealth away to the poor, and violating a marriage agreement all of her own accord. And in front of Picatius, Lucy agreed to these charges. Uh, and she reported that she behaved in accordance of her own volition. She denied any sickness, she denied any illness, she denied being possessed by anything. She just plain out said she was doing this because that's what she felt like doing. And as a result, Picatius ordered Lucy be removed from her home and delivered to a brothel where she was to serve as a prostitute. She, of course, refused to comply with the order. And Picatius called on first a single and then several guards to lift Lucy's body from her home and deliver her to the brothel. However, none of the guards combined were able to lift her from her home. Next, Picatius had her hitched to a yoke of oxen, and Lucy would still not be removed from her place. Now growing even more frustrated and humiliated, Picatius ordered a pyre to be lit around her. Unwilling to be moved and still blind, Lucy submitted to the reality that she was going to be burned alive. However, the flames would not touch her. And at this time, Lucy issued a warning to Picatius. She told him he would be punished for his treatment of her, but this warning was the final straw for Picatius. He called for the executioner to come. He arrived and pierced Lucy's throat with his sword, finally killing her. Later, as the legend goes, as Lucy's body was prepared for burial, it was shown that her eyes had been restored as if they were never removed. And that's the story of St. Lucy. And as we can see, there are some themes that are super common here between these two women. There's the issue of nobility and people with money really believing they could do whatever they want to women's bodies. Or to the women that they had a proximity to. So Damon felt that he had a right to be with his daughter, and he had a right to ask her for marriage and to demand her, make a vow of marriage to her. The nobleman in St. Lucy's story believed that he had some kind of claim to her body, had some kind of claim to her life, had some kind of claim to her money, to the point that he was willing to see her delivered to a brothel rather than let her spend her life as a virgin. Like, what is going on in these streets that these dudes think this about women? That having a woman who doesn't want to have sex at all remanded to a brothel is a just way of dealing with the situation. And so another common theme here, and one that perhaps all us dudes could learn from, is one, respecting boundaries, like no means no, of course, but two, respecting the fact that the women in our lives have their own individual agency. They have a right and they are entitled to, like, not even they have a right, they are entitled to, because there is a difference between the two. There's a difference between a right and being entitled to something. We are all entitled to the air that we breathe. We are all entitled to move as we see fit, so long as our movements don't violate, the sanctity of someone else's life. Women have that entitlement. They are entitled to their own sense of agency. And learning to respect that is going to be something that goes a long way in our relationships with women. Taking that a step further, upholding the agency of women is going to be something that, people will recognize, and it will go a long way in enhancing our own reputations. Another theme that is present in both of these stories is the use of money to help the disenfranchised. Now, in Dymphna's story, it wasn't necessarily frowned upon that she was helping poor people in Geel with her remaining money, with maybe what would have been her dowry or what have you. However, that was the act that led to her being found out and being discovered. And with Lucy giving away her money, and the money that the nobleman believed he was entitled to, was also something that was used against her. So in addition to women having agency, but also acknowledging and upholding that women are allowed to do what they want with their finances, right? They're allowed to give it to who they want. They're allowed to spend it on what they want. They're allowed to make a way for themselves with their money. And the overall need or reliance or dependence on men is not an excuse to mistreat women. It seems like it's always been kind of a myth. That might be something that, is kind of worked into a type of class situation, right? We acknowledge that we live in a patriarchal society where things are generally slanted to favor the desires and the whims of men or patriarchs. But it seems like in relationships, historically speaking, these two stories are not the only stories that demonstrate the fact that women have always had the capacity to make decisions, to spend money, to do dealings in business. And that perhaps this systemic denial of these things might be a relatively new invention, or might be an invention of, a specific group of people that kind of, it got found out and got picked up and ran with. But it doesn't seem to be something that is replicated across cultures. Even, Dymphna's father recognized the necessity to respect his daughter's wishes when it comes to who she wanted to marry or how she wanted to spend her life. And so while we can argue the toxicity of a patriarchal society, we can also honor and uphold the fact that there are men who do recognize and on purpose go against that norm for the betterment of the people in their lives and potentially for the betterment of society. And that's the last point to be discussed here with these stories, is that women who are left to their own devices, who are given, or in this case, who steal their agency, as with Dymphna's story, women who do utilize or who do maximize or capitalize on their own agency, use it to support community in generous and authentic ways. I do hope that you are able to connect with this story. I do hope you do some more research on the issues pertaining to intimate partner violence. I hope you feel motivated and compelled to speak out against this issue, to support people who might be going through this issue, non-judgmentally. And definitely try your best to support the women in your life. Again, my name is Reverend Phoenix Coffin-Williams. I am coming to you from the Temple of Holistic Knowledge. And this has been my little discussion about intimate partner violence, ways to not be a toxic man. So again, respecting boundaries, respecting and upholding agency, and supporting women as they capitalize on all of their rights. And so again, my name is Reverend Phoenix Coffin-Williams. I'm coming to you from the Temple of Holistic Knowledge, and this has been my way of honoring Intimate Partner Violence Awareness Month for this year. Look forward to next year, where we again approach this topic. And if you have any thoughts or suggestions or things that you want to add, feel free to email me or contact me on Facebook, or you can comment on this video. You can also take a look at previous intimate partner violence celebrations that have involved other speakers that have involved other presenters in the past. So you can go to bluedoorevents.weebly.com and you can take a look at past conferences for this issue. But until next time, blessed be.